On a gray and rainy morning in the heart of Birmingham, as water streaked down foggy windows and the streets glistened under a steady drizzle, inside a small cafe tucked along a cobbled side street, the lives of two strangers, seemingly worlds apart, were about to collide in the most unexpected way. The cafe, Maple and Steam, wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. It was a quiet refuge for weary commuters and pensioners reading their morning papers. But that day, amidst the low hum of espresso machines and the clinking of china, a man in his early 50s walked through the door, soaked to the bone. His coat was worn and dripping, his shoes scuffed and tired. With rain still dripping from the edge of his graying hair, he approached the counter and softly asked for a black coffee, then froze, fumbling through his pockets. No wallet, no coins, only growing embarrassment. The young barista behind the till scoffed and raised his voice. "This isn't a shelter," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "No money, no service." Whispers followed, sneers. Someone muttered, "Imagine turning up here skint and expecting a freebie." The man's shoulders hunched. He turned slowly, eyes downcast, ready to leave. Then a voice cut through the murmurs. "I'll pay for it." Isla Turner, 29 years old, waitress and part-time carer, stepped forward and laid a crumpled 5-pound note on the counter. She wasn't dressed for heroics, just in her faded cafe apron and scuffed trainers, but the look in her eyes was calm, resolute. She knew that look on the man's face. She'd worn it herself, many times. She didn't know his story, didn't ask. She simply couldn't bear to watch someone be humiliated for not having enough. What Isla didn't realize was that the man she just stood up for wasn't a drifter, nor a beggar. His name was Charles Hemsley, an elusive billionaire with more assets than anyone could count. But that day he wasn't looking for investments. He was looking for someone who could see past the clothes, past the assumptions, someone who offered kindness with no strings attached. And in Isla's quiet act of compassion, he saw what he had long stopped believing in, a heart that didn't care who you were, only how you were treated. That single coffee would become the beginning of something far more powerful than either of them could imagine. When Isla returned home that evening, her shift still lingering in her bones and her coat damp with the remains of the drizzle, the warmth of the tiny flat she shared with her younger sister offered little comfort. Their one-bedroom council flat was no palace, peeling wallpaper, a kettle that wheezed like an old man, and a window that never quite shut properly. Her sister Lucy was curled under a blanket on the sofa, her cough soft but persistent. Isla knelt beside her and touched her forehead gently. "You're warm," she whispered, brushing damp hair from Lucy's face. She didn't say anything about the man at the cafe or the way people had looked at her afterwards. She just heated the last of their leftover stew, added a pinch of salt, and watched her sister eat. Later, when Lucy had fallen asleep and the street outside quieted into soft shadows, Isla sat by the window watching the rain trickle down the glass. She had just £3 left in her purse, a half-used bus pass, and an old photograph of their mum tucked into her wallet. But still, no regret. Not for the coffee, not for standing up, not for choosing to be decent when no one else did. Her thoughts drifted back years to when she was 15. Their mum had collapsed in a market after skipping meals to afford school shoes. People walked by, every single one of them, except one old woman in a worn-out cardigan who knelt beside them, offered water, and wrapped Isla in a shawl that smelled faintly of lavender. Isla never forgot her, never even learned her name. But that act of kindness had stayed, rooted deep in her heart. And in the cafe today, when that man stood there, embarrassed, soaked, invisible, it hadn't been a decision. It had been instinct. People had laughed at her, whispered behind her back. But as she looked at her reflection in the window, tired and pale, she saw something steady behind her eyes. Quiet dignity. The kind you don't need permission for. The kind no one can take from you. The next morning at the cafe, Isla moved quietly between tables, wiping crumbs and offering polite smiles, trying to pretend the stares no longer bothered her. It had been days since she paid for that old man's coffee, yet the whispers hadn't faded. Her colleagues barely spoke to her, and customers glanced over with thinly disguised judgment or awkward curiosity. She kept her head down, hoping the moment would pass. But then, just after the morning rush, the bell above the door chimed again, and everything shifted. A man entered, tall, distinguished, dressed in a charcoal wool coat and scarf. His shoes were polished, his hair neatly combed, salt and pepper against a tanned complexion. He didn't go to the counter. He walked straight to the window seat, the same one where the man had sat, soaked and humiliated just days before. Isla's breath caught. It was him. She approached slowly, uncertain, holding a menu she didn't plan to offer. Before she could speak, he looked up and said simply, "I'm not here to order." Isla blinked, unsure how to respond. "I only have one question," he said, his voice calm and sincere. "Why did you help me?" She hesitated. "Because I couldn't not help. You didn't look like someone asking for a handout. You looked like someone being made to feel small, and I know how that feels." She sat opposite him, her apron still dusted with flour and her trainers damp from a leaky back room. He didn't flinch or look away. Instead, he listened. They began to talk, not about money or mistakes, but about music, books, cities, and what loneliness does to people. Ayla found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in what felt like months. He wasn't what she expected. Not a billionaire seeking to flaunt power, not a test disguised as a lesson. Just a man, one who had lived long enough to value presence over pretense. And Ayla, who had always been overlooked, felt something rare, seen. In that ordinary cafe under flickering bulbs and the smell of burnt toast, something extraordinary had begun. Two strangers, connected not by circumstance but by a simple moment of compassion neither of them would forget. 4 days had passed since Isla's quiet defiance at the cafe, yet the ripples still lingered. Though no one said it directly, she felt it in the half-heard whispers, the glances that lingered just a bit too long, the slight hesitation before a colleague handed her a tray. She had learned long ago how to live invisibly, to slip through shifts unnoticed, doing her job with quiet efficiency. But now they saw her, and not in the way she'd hoped. Her act of kindness had branded her something different, naive, foolish, a girl with misplaced idealism in a world that rewarded cold logic. Her manager, Mr. Carson, had wasted no time reminding her where she stood. "This is a business, Isla, not your personal mission field," he snapped when he called her into the back office, a cramped space that reeked of cleaning solution and stale coffee. "You embarrassed your colleague, made a scene, made customers uncomfortable." She remained calm, responding simply, "I paid for it myself." But it wasn't about money, not really. It was about the rules, the unspoken ones that said some people mattered more than others, and she had dared to challenge that hierarchy. Back in the kitchen, her co-workers kept their distance. Marcia muttered, "Must be easy to play the hero when you're splitting rent with your little sister." Isla didn't reply. There was no point. She finished her shift in silence and stepped into the rain-soaked city evening, her trainers squelching on the pavement. The flat she shared with her sister Mia was cramped and cold, the wallpaper peeling at the edges and the window drafty no matter how many towels they stuffed in the cracks. But it was theirs and it was safe. That night, as Mia slept beneath a patched quilt, Isla sat at the window and stared out at the rain. Her wallet held £3 and a bus ticket, but no regret. Not for the coffee, not for the confrontation. Because years ago, when her mother collapsed in a shopping queue and no one helped, one stranger did, and Isla had made herself a promise that day, a promise she now kept. The memory of her mother collapsing all those years ago wasn't something Isla often spoke about, but it lived quietly in the corners of her life. She was just a teenager when it happened, barely 15, overwhelmed, frightened, trying to shake her mother awake in the middle of a crowded market while people simply stepped around them. Most walked faster, eyes averted. But one elderly woman, wearing a threadbare coat and faded headscarf, had stopped. She knelt beside Isla, offered a bottle of water and wrapped a worn wool shawl around her shoulders. Isla never even caught her name, but the moment burned itself into her memory, not just for the compassion but for how rare it was. That day became her silent vow. If she ever had the chance to make someone feel seen, she'd take it. So when the old man entered the cafe, soaked from the rain and clearly embarrassed, something inside Isla simply moved. She didn't think about who he might be or what anyone else might say. She just acted. But now, in the stillness of her modest flat, with her younger sister Mia sleeping on the couch and their dinner stretched thin once again, Isla allowed herself to reflect. Not on what she'd lost, but on what she'd protected. Her integrity, her humanity, her vow. She sat by the window, tracing the raindrops as they slid down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, pale skin, auburn hair pulled back out of habit, not style. But behind the weariness there was something more enduring. Quiet strength. She didn't have much, but she had that, and somehow it was enough. As she turned off the light and whispered into the dark, it wasn't for comfort. It was for truth. I'd rather be mocked for doing the right thing than praised for staying silent. In a world that often rewarded indifference, Isla had chosen compassion. Not because it would be noticed, but because it mattered. And even though she was the one with nothing to spare, she had given something priceless, dignity, to a stranger who needed it most. 4 days had passed since the rainy morning Isla chose to pay for the old man's coffee, and though no one openly criticized her, the silence had grown heavier. Her colleagues at the cafe, once casually friendly, now muttered just loud enough for her to hear. The manager, Brian, called her into the office, his words sharp, reminding her that kindness didn't fit into business margins. "This isn't a charity," he snapped, ignoring the fact that she'd used her own money. Isla didn't argue. She simply looked him in the eye and left with her dignity intact. It stung, of course, the whispers, the assumptions that she'd helped the man out of some naive fantasy or in hopes of a reward. But she'd grown up learning the hard way that you didn't show kindness to be praised. You did it because you knew what it felt like to be invisible. Back at home in their tiny flat, the weight of everything seemed to settle into Isla's shoulders. Her younger sister Mia was curled on the sofa under a thin blanket, fighting a stubborn winter cold. Their flat was cold too, the window drafty and the heater unreliable. Isla made porridge from the last of their oats, added a pinch of salt, and sat with Mia until she fell asleep. Then she checked her purse. 3 pounds, a bus pass, a photo of their mum. Not a single regret. Sitting by the window, she thought again of the man from the cafe, the way his eyes had brimmed with unshed tears when she'd handed him that cup. No gratitude demanded, just a quiet moment of being seen. She didn't know who he was, didn't care about his past or his future. She saw someone who needed warmth and offered it. The world had tried to teach Isla that kindness was weakness, that people like her, broke, struggling, unheard, should stay quiet and grateful. But she had learned something far more powerful. Real strength lies in doing good when no one's watching, in standing tall even when the world tries to cut you down. And in that silence, in that flat with barely enough, Isla found something money couldn't buy: peace. It had been nearly a week since Isla offered a stranger a seat and a coffee during a rainstorm, expecting nothing in return, only to find him walking into the cafe again, but this time transformed. Gone was the man in the threadbare coat. In his place stood Charles Everly, impeccably dressed and quietly composed, exuding the kind of calm confidence that drew attention without demanding it. Isla didn't recognize him at first, but as he sat at the same table by the window, it clicked. Her heart skipped. He wasn't here to reprimand or to test her, he simply wanted to talk. "Why did you help me?" he asked gently, his voice free of judgment. Isla, caught off guard, answered with the only truth she had: "Because I know what it's like to feel small and unseen. I've been there." Their conversation unfolded like an old song rediscovered, natural, resonant, unexpectedly soothing. They spoke of books and music, cities they'd both never seen, and the way people turn cruel when they feel powerless. It wasn't flirtation, and it wasn't pity. It was connection. For Isla, who spent her days pouring coffee and clearing crumbs while trying to hold her life together at home, this moment wasn't about who Charles was. It was about being heard, being treated like someone whose thoughts mattered. She didn't yet know the depth of Charles's wealth or why he'd walked in the way he had the first time. But what mattered most was this. In a world where everyone seemed to look past her, he had stopped and asked to know her better. Not because she could offer him something, but because of who she was when no one was watching. And that, more than money, more than status, was the rarest gift of all. As she watched him walk away that afternoon, something in her shifted. Perhaps she wasn't as invisible as the world made her feel. Perhaps finally she was being seen. The rain had returned, soft and steady, tracing lines down the cafe window as Isla stood inside her newly opened shop. Her shop. Once she was a waitress barely getting by, caring for her younger sister in a cramped flat with little more than grit and quiet dignity. She had nothing to offer the world but a warm smile and a kind gesture, yet it was that very gesture, paying for a stranger's coffee and dignity on a rainy day, that set her entire life on a new path. The man she helped turned out to be a billionaire, yes, but more importantly, he was someone searching for hope. Together, they discovered that the richest connections are born not from status or success, but from recognizing the humanity in one another. Now, her cafe stands as a beacon of that truth. No price list, just an invitation. Your first cup is on us. The second, if you can, on someone else. It's more than coffee. It's a promise that no one is too small to be seen, and no act of kindness is ever wasted. The lesson here? Sometimes the world teaches us that kindness is a weakness, that we should guard what little we have and expect nothing in return. But Isla's story reminds us that compassion isn't a transaction, it's a ripple. One selfless choice can echo across years, change lives, even rewrite our own. True wealth isn't measured in pounds or possessions. It's found in the courage to care when no one else will. So if you've ever felt invisible, unimportant, or too small to matter, remember Isla. Remember the rain, the warmth of a simple coffee, and how one moment of empathy can illuminate a lifetime. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone who changed your life through a small act of kindness, share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more powerful tales that remind us what truly matters. One click, one comment, one connection, that's how we keep hope alive.